The third princess, Anabel, is capricious and willful, and her attempt to express her love to her young teacher fails. He ordered his men to break his legs, gave him strong drugs, and after a night of passion, imprisoned him. From then on, the cold and aloof young master became a canary with broken wings in the third princess's palace. When he was about to hang himself, I showed up and let him go. But later, he tied my hands and feet with iron chains, leaned over and laughed softly. The third princess shouldn't have let me go back then. 1. When I first met Philip Clark. He was thin and pale, dressed in black, sitting in a wheelchair. His eyes were dark and looked desolate and lonely, but his face under his long hair was breathtakingly beautiful. I couldn't help but panic. Philip Clark saw me staring at him, curled his lips, and said mockingly, "What tricks did the third princess learn to humiliate me today?" Seeing him so displeased with me, then I remembered that my current identity is the third princess, Anabel. This is a romance novel. After I died of illness, I inexplicably turned into the third princess in the book. Philip Clark is the disabled second male lead with a tragic fate. At the beginning of the story, I kicked the proud Philip Clark into the mud, broke his legs, and abused him with strong drugs. It wasn't until the fourth princess, Wynn, who was the heroine, was taken back to the palace by her father, the emperor, that she rescued him from the mud. In the original book, the third princess's ending was extremely tragic. After Philip Clark helped the fourth princess, Wynn, become the empress, he tied my hands and feet, threw me into a brothel, and called a dozen beggars to humiliate me. In the end, not only will I become a mentally retarded person, but my body will also be thrown into a mass grave. 2. Thinking of the tragic ending of the original owner of this body, I couldn't help but frown. The evil consequences have now been sown, but everything has just begun, and it is not irreparable. I ordered someone to bring the ointment, squatted down, and stroked his legs. Philip Clark looked at me calmly, his eyes filled with disgust as I lifted his robes. He chuckled. Even in my current state, the third princess is still interested in me. I said nothing, nor did I humiliate him like in the original book. Instead, I applied the ointment little by little to the scars on his legs, rubbing and caressing them gently. He looked slightly stunned. "What is the third princess doing?" I pointed at his leg and said, "I asked the imperial physician, and it's not that this leg is incurable. Apply ointment, do acupuncture, massage, and soak in medicinal food every day, and it will be healed in 100 days." Philip Clark's eyes flashed with joy, but soon turned gloomy again. Now, whether my legs are good or not, I am still a useless person. What difference does it make? I lowered my head and comforted him softly. "You have amazing talent and will definitely become a pillar of the court in the future. How can you underestimate yourself?" Philip Clark snorted and glanced at me sideways. In his opinion, it is absurd for a perpetrator to comfort the person he is worldly, bright, and cold, which makes people addicted. I slowly took off his robe and unbuttoned his trousers. Philip Clark closed his eyes, his expression calm from beginning to end. "It will be a little painful, just bear with it." Then, I inserted the silver needle vertically into his Zusonli acupoint. Philip Clark opened his eyes suddenly, looking stunned for a moment. He looked straight at my hands and asked, "What are you doing?" "It's obvious. I'll give you acupuncture. Precise acupuncture and massage. 1 hour a day will do." 3. I said softly, "I caused your injury. From today on, I will give you acupuncture and massage every day until you recover." Philip Clark clenched his fists, his body stiff. Is this the new move that the third princess came up with? He suddenly grabbed my arm and stared at me. He had never been so panicked even when Anabel had his legs broken, drugged, and stripped him of his clothes. Philip Clark was never afraid of torture, but he was afraid of soft knives. The gentle knife confuses people's minds and takes their lives. I won't explain and just focus on studying his leg injury. Before I traveled through time, I was a Chinese medicine practitioner, and curing diseases and saving lives was my lifelong wish. While reading the book, I always felt sorry for Philip Clark because he wasted his life due to illness, and then, because of his inferiority complex due to his disabled leg, he gave up the love of the heroine Wynn. After Wynn turned to Wei Shu, he completely turned evil and gradually became a cruel regent. Clearly, at the beginning of the story, he was Qingfeng Jiue's junior teacher. At the beginning of the story, the book describes him like this: Philip Clark is handsome and unparalleled, with a cold and arrogant look between his eyebrows. At a young age, he wrote a powerful and impressive book and was proficient in the ways of the government and the public. He was a young prodigy that was rarely seen in a century. But the ending of the story is, he looked at the beautiful girl under the moonlight, the peach blossom wine poured by the Empress herself. The fragrance was charming. Philip Clark smiled silently. Now he has become a demon in the eyes of the world. He didn't want to embarrass his beloved girl, so he drank the cup of poisonous wine in one gulp. The second half of Philip Clark's life was characterized by loneliness and desolation. The young man whom I once felt sorry for in my heart is now sitting at the head of the bed, looking at me, his eyes deep and unfathomable. Fortunately, this is just the beginning of the story. I threw his robe to him and said calmly, "I have lost interest in you. When your leg injury heals, leave my palace." 4. I placed Philip Clark in the side hall to recover from his injuries. There is never a shortage of secrets in the red-walled Vade. Rumors immediately spread in the palace that the third princess had become tired of him and the beautiful young teacher had fallen out of favor. I felt uneasy upon hearing this and went to visit him in the side hall. It was a cold winter day, but there was not even a charcoal fire in the side hall where Philip Clark was. Philip Clark, dressed in black with slightly disheveled hair, sat in front of a red sandalwood desk in thin clothes, quietly and attentively flipping through a thick scripture. When he looked up at me, his hair fell on his handsome face, and my heart was beating like a drum. "Why is the princess here?" Philip Clark's voice was a little hoarse. I walked slowly towards him and reached out to touch the back of his hand. As expected, it was as cold as ice. "Why not light a charcoal fire?" The corners of his lips curled up and he smiled. "Having lost the princess's favor, I am nothing more than an abandoned child in the eyes of others." I don't know if it's my illusion. There was something fierce in Philip Clark's smile, and I couldn't help but shudder. Only then did I remember that the third princess died too early in the original plot. In the second half of the story, Philip Clark kills people like crazy and takes revenge for every grievance. He steps on the corpses of many people to pave the way for the fourth princess, Wynn, to become the empress. I frowned, leaned down, and looked him in the eye. "Your wound must not get cold. You can punish those who mistreat you, and you can ask me for anything you need. Before you were my junior teacher and a distinguished guest in my princess palace." Philip Clark stared at me. His expression seemed a little dazed, and he said word by word, "Third princess, I need some charcoal, and I also need ink and rice paper." 5. How are you going to punish those maids who treated you harshly? Philip Clark pondered for a moment, then said in a low and cold voice, "Then let them have no meat to eat and no charcoal to use for the remaining half-month." I laughed. This is the Philip Clark I know. Everyone says that Philip Clark is an evil demon after he turned evil, but I understand from a god's perspective that he just believes in treating good with good, evil with evil, and giving others a taste of their own medicine. In the later plot, all those vicious things Philip Clark did were just to help the fourth princess Wynn seize power. He never had any selfish motives for a moment. Philip Clark was a fool. He bled on his hands and ruined his reputation, all for the innocent girl who smiled at him and saved him from the quagmire when they first met. He even died because he didn't want to embarrass his beloved girl. My heart aches. In Philip Clark's mind, I am the evil princess who ruined his life. Only Wynn is the moon that redeems him. 6. The moonlight is lonely and the wind and snow are howling. I was lying in bed, thinking hard. The 100-day deadline is approaching. Based on my experience in treatment, Philip Clark's injuries should have healed to a large extent. But why is he still unable to stand and walk? Is it because I am not skilled enough? Or does Philip Clark have another heart disease? Suddenly, I heard someone push the door open and walk into the hall slowly. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, but I could feel someone standing beside my bed, and the faint smell of ointment on that person came into my nostrils. The ointment was prepared and prepared by me, Philip Clark. Why did he enter my palace so late at night? Your leg disease has clearly healed, so why are you pretending to be lame? Philip Clark sat on the edge of the bed, stared at me for a long time, and suddenly turned over and got on the bed. I was extremely nervous at this moment, my fingers tightly gripping the quilt, not knowing whether I should pretend to be awakened by him. Philip Clark gently lifted the straps of the small dress, and it fell to the bottom of the bed. A large area of naked skin was suddenly exposed to the cold winter air, emitting unbearable coldness. But soon I no longer felt cold, because his body covered my exposed skin. The heat from his skin was endless, and a burning fire suddenly burned in my heart. In the darkness, I finally couldn't help but open my eyes. Philip Clark, what are you doing? Philip Clark raised his eyebrows and looked at me with burning eyes. Why doesn't the third princess continue to pretend to be asleep? I was a little annoyed. You sneaked into my bed late at night. Do you know that you are committing a capital crime? Philip Clark laughed softly. Princess, what good would it do if I died? I frowned and looked at him in confusion. He put his hand into my underwear, as if trying to arouse my feelings. How could this be Philip Clark? He should have refused my touch. After each action, he would take a bath and burn incense to wash off the smell of powder left by the third princess. To him, making love with me was a shame. Third princess, what do you want? He leaned over and chuckled, coaxing me when I was aroused. I suddenly understood why Philip Clark came tonight. In this palace full of intrigue, there are only dirty deals and naked desires. He doesn't believe that I do all this without any purpose. I feel a little sad. Only the innocent Wynn, who grew up outside the palace, could make him let down his guard. In his eyes, I have always been the sinister, vicious, mean, and ungrateful third princess. 7. Is your leg healed? I asked him softly. Philip Clark was stunned and stopped what he was doing. But soon, he raised his eyebrows again and asked gently, My leg was cured by the third princess. What does the third princess want me to do for your highness? What do I want? I muttered to myself, repeating his words. Yes, what does the third princess want? Philip Clark hugged me gently, played with my hair, and asked me in an extremely gentle tone. In the dark night, Philip Clark's mouth was curled with an intoxicating smile, and his eyes seemed to contain thousands of stars, which made my heart ripple like a spring water. But I know that beneath his gentle face lies a murderous intent. I raised my head and said calmly, I don't want anything. Since your leg injury has healed, you can leave tomorrow. Philip Clark frowned slightly and stared at me, as if he wanted to see through me. Apparently, my answer was not to his liking. After harming people and then showing kindness, Philip Clark couldn't figure out what the third princess was going to do. Male beauty, wealth, power. In this deep palace, everyone has their own desires. But now, I just simply want to help this young man who has not yet completely stepped into the road of despair. Philip Clark, if you need help in the future, you can always come to the third princess. He frowned, looking somewhat displeased. It seems that the third princess really dislikes me, so I will withdraw. Philip Clark pretended to be nonchalant, but his staggering when he got off the bed betrayed him. After Philip Clark left, the place where he had lain was still warm. I am a little greedy for this warmth, but it all seems like a spring dream I had. The residual warmth dissipated, and there was no trace when I woke up. I reminded myself that I had to stay away from Philip Clark. I couldn't afford this person. The next morning, Philip Clark had left my princess palace. This is fine. He and I have never been on the same path. 8. Not long after Philip Clark left, the fourth princess Wynn appeared. She appears a little earlier than in the original plot, perhaps because I let Philip Clark go, so the plot of the story has changed. When she first met Wynn, she was standing up for Philip Clark, who was being insulted. The eunuchs in the palace were used to flattery and praising the powerful. When they saw me from afar, they deliberately laughed at Philip Clark, who had become the keeper of the archives, in front of me. They said he was a concubine who used sex to please his master, and mocked him for serving his master with a seductive smile and lewd deeds, saying he was not as good as these eunuchs. Every word and sentence is unbearable to hear. These people did not realize that Philip Clark was just a beast temporarily trapped in a cage. Once he was released, his sharp teeth would bite their throats, and even the bones would be chewed into pieces. I clenched my fists and walked forward quickly. But someone's whip was whipping these slaves' faces faster than mine. With each whip, the eunuchs who had been so arrogant just now let out painful cries. The girl is dressed in red, looking heroic and stunningly beautiful even without any makeup. Her beauty is striking at first glance. Wynn shouted in a dignified manner, "You are a bunch of sycophants. Master Clark is the best in the world. Do you think you can insult him at will?" Her eyes fell on me again. It's just that those in high positions use their power to take advantage of others and humiliate others. How can they be sincere? The person in a high position that Wynn is referring to is obviously me. She is worthy of being the heroine. As soon as she appears, she radiates a dazzling glow. Even the usually cold Philip Clark looks at her with bright and gentle eyes. Although the plot has changed, the heroine Wynn saved him the moment she appeared. But this time, different from the original plot, Philip Clark is no longer incomplete. He can finally love freely and embrace the moon that belongs to him. I turned around and left silently. 9. Philip Clark became the tutor of the fourth Princess Wynn. It is said that Wynn would go to his father's palace every day to ask for the bird's nest he had cooked himself. Not long after, I heard from the maid that Philip Clark's leg disease relapsed, and the fourth princess, Wynn, took care of him by his bedside without taking off her clothes. She only returned to the palace after being scolded by her father. I frowned. Has Philip Clark's leg disease relapsed? In the dark night, the wind was biting cold. I wrapped myself in a cloak, holding a rosewood hexagonal palace lantern, pretending to be a palace maid, and shuttled through the wind and snow. When I walked into the dark and silent little hall, I vaguely saw the flickering candlelight in front of the bed. The doors and windows were closed. The room was full of the smell of herbs, and Philip Clark was lying on the bed, motionless. With a creak, I gently pushed open the window, and the bitterness of the herbs immediately dissipated a lot. Third princess, why are you here? Philip Clark propped himself up with his arms, lowered his eyes, and smiled at me gently. His face was pale. A layer of cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and his voice was hoarse. Looking at him like this, I felt indescribable bitterness in my heart. Let me see you. I lifted his robe and unbuttoned his trousers as usual. He frowned and moved his lips, but said nothing. I lifted up the wound that the imperial physician had bandaged for him. The scar on his leg was red, swollen, and oozing pus. The wound was ruptured and infected. The imperial physician did not clean the wound and reduce the inflammation, but instead gave him strong medicine. Philip Clark's cold voice rang in my ears again. "Princess, why do you come here so late at night?" I replied, "I told you I would heal your leg." He said nothing, but just stared at me closely, his eyes dim and unclear. I sighed softly in my heart. The utmost virtue is the foundation of behavior. The good medical practitioner helps the world, and curing diseases and saving lives are the original duties of a doctor. What's more, his injuries were caused by the original owner of my body. Under the dim candlelight, I carefully wiped his wound with a medicine bag wrapped in penicillium and gently told him, "I heard that you took Wynn to visit the palace every day. The recurrence of your leg injury is probably due to overwork." Philip Clark said softly, "The fourth princess has lived among the common people since she was young. It is natural that she is more curious when she first enters the palace." I smiled, feeling bitter in my heart. How could I forget that Philip Clark was willing to sacrifice his life for her? So, what does a small leg injury matter? I rewrapped his wound and gently warned him, "You need to rest your leg injury and stop messing around with Wynn." Philip Clark looked at me quietly without saying anything. I packed up my medicine bag and turned to leave when I heard Philip Clark ask, "Will the third princess come to see me again?" I replied, "I will come to change the medicine in 3 days." 10. Every 3 days, I would wrap myself up in a snowy outfit and go to Philip Clark's small hall late at night to change his dressings. But today, from far outside Philip Clark's small hall, a silver bell-like laughter was heard. A bright light was on in the house, and a pair of beautiful people were reflected on the window. I walked closer and heard Philip Clark gently say to Wynn, "Fourth princess, it's late at night and the dew is heavy. Go back to the bedroom and rest early." The girl said coquettishly, "Okay." I blew out the lantern in my hand, hid in the darkness of the corridor, and watched Wynn walking further and further away. There were no lights in the corridor, and I followed the lonely and cold moonlight into the small hall. Philip Clark sat at the table, looking at me covered in frost and snow, and pointed at the copper-cup flower-shaped hand warmer beside him. "Go warm your hands." I recognized that hand warmer. It is a gift from my father to Wynn. It is extremely precious. This time, I didn't tell Philip Clark to lie down on the bed. I squatted down in front of his desk and changed the dressing for him. After bandaging the wound, I looked up at him and said, "Philip Clark, I won't come again." The moonlight shone on his beautiful face, and his eyes showed no trace of sadness or joy. He didn't say anything. I felt a little embarrassed and continued to chatter. "I have also paid for my mistakes in the past. I wanted to recommend you in the officialdom, but now you have the help of Wynn. Your career is smooth, and you don't need me anymore." Philip Clark leaned forward slightly, his eyes calm and gentle. "The third princess seems to be jealous of the fourth princess." I laughed quietly and admitted openly, "Yes, I am quite jealous of her." He smiled slowly. "Third princess, you have everything. Why are you jealous of her?" "What on earth am I jealous of, Wynn? It's more like envy than jealousy. Now I have become the third princess who has everything, but I envy Wynn who lives among the people. Her eyes are filled with a lively and bright luster. She dares to love and hate, and she is bright and charming. This kind of innocence is something that the third princess, who lives in the palace full of intrigue, does not have. It is also something that I, who have received an elite education since childhood and have a dull personality, do not have. Just like in the world before the time travel, those girls with distinct personalities, cuteness and brightness are the protagonists in everyone's eyes. Philip Clark's eyes suddenly tightened. Third princess, you suddenly made me unpredictable. Is your perverse, willful, arrogant, and domineering mask a disguise? He suddenly stroked the back of my head, his eyes full of tenderness, and kissed me softly. I rested my waist on his arms, and I closed my eyes, with the fresh scent of tea between my teeth. After the kiss, I breathed slightly in his arms, but found that Philip Clark pursed his lips and observed my reaction. Philip Clark tempted me with himself, tested me. I was a fool. I knew that everything Philip Clark did was for Wynn. He only needed to coax me gently and affectionately, and I was easily bewitched by him again. Philip Clark, I called his name softly. Love only needs to be 70% full, so don't be so stupid in the future. 11. After that day, I didn't see Philip Clark for a long time. Even if one didn't go to inquire, news about him was constantly circulating in the palace. Philip Clark resigned as the fourth princess's tutor and became a royal attendant. His father adopted Philip Clark's suggestion to reduce the heavy taxes. Philip Clark was a young genius with great potential. How could a dragon be trapped in a pond? I fiddled with the herbs in my hand with satisfaction and was truly happy for him. Everyone in the palace said that the third princess had changed. She got rid of her bad habits of pursuing comfort and liking romantic things, started to study medicine, and even took the imperial physician as her teacher. Some people began to make up stories, saying that the third princess was jealous of the fourth princess and was afraid that the fourth princess would compete with her for the position of empress. Even my father was testing me to see if I was interested in inheriting the throne. I presented the tonic pills I had made myself and stated my determination in front of my father that I would become a female doctor who would save the world. My father looked at me with satisfaction and said that I had inherited my mother, Concubine Land's last wish. He also praised me for finally growing up and becoming sensible. In fact, I don't care about these false rumors in the palace. I'm just curious about what Philip Clark would think. If I become a stumbling block on Wynn's road to becoming the empress, will he kill me like he did to those who got in his way in the original plot? I sniffed and suddenly smelled the faint scent of burnt herbs in the air. I quickly got up and turned off the engine with a wry smile. As expected, since ancient times, male beauty has distracted people from their duties. 12. Another spring has passed. This summer, continuous strong winds and heavy rains caused floods in many places. The floods submerged many villages and soaked the rice. After the natural disaster, many victims flocked into the capital, and beggars were everywhere. It is said that the corpse collectors are busy walking the streets every day, and the straw mats for collecting corpses are in short supply, which can't cover the last bit of dignity and protection of these poor people. The queen was about to ask my father to allow me to accompany the imperial doctors to treat the victims outside the palace, Wynn was also asking my father in the hall. What she asked for was for her father to issue an edict granting her marriage to Philip Clark. The father frowned and looked at Wynn with displeasure. We will discuss this matter later. He looked at me with a resentful look on his face and said, Are you here for that Philip Clark too? I am here to solve the medical problems of the disaster victims. After I finished speaking, my father raised his eyebrows and looked very interested. How do you want to solve it? There are a large number of victims in the capital who are injured and sick, and there is a shortage of doctors. Some patients who do not need emergency treatment can be transferred to places with sufficient medical resources near the imperial city. Temporary treatment stations will be established at the entrances of the alleys in the capital, and doctors from the imperial hospital will be stationed there. The emperor smiled and said, Philip Clark just suggested to me that we should immigrate for food, and you came up with immigrate for medical treatment. Very good, very good. I bowed my head and knelt down. I request your permission to accompany the imperial hospital out of the palace to help the wounded. The emperor raised his eyebrows. You are the third princess of our dynasty. How dare you approach those disaster victims with your precious body? I am also a female doctor. A benevolent doctor should not ask the patient whether he is rich or poor. The father smiled and said, You have really grown up. 13. Outside the palace, Wynn frowned and said coldly, Do you know that I asked my father for permission to marry you and you deliberately came to disturb me? I looked her straight in the eye and said calmly, People are suffering from floods and have no clothes to wear. Victims of the disaster are dying of hunger every day. Do you think love is more important? Wynn was choked by my words. I'm not. In the original plot, the heroine Wynn has lofty ambitions. Because she once lived among the people, she understands the sufferings of the common people better. After taking office, she launched new policies, punished corrupt officials, valued wise and capable people, and worked hard to alleviate the poverty of the people, thus creating her own prosperous era. She is definitely not the fourth princess who is now limited to love and ignores the suffering of the displaced people. I looked at her with a gloomy face. I won't compete with you for Philip Clark. He is yours and I can't take him away from him. Wynn pursed his lips, looking thoughtful and a little guilty. I helped her tidy up her hair and continued, You were right. People in high positions do have power, but they also have responsibilities that must be fulfilled. You are smarter than me, so you should understand. I turned around and saw Philip Clark standing in the corridor staring at me with cold eyes. He came closer, his cold eyes flashing with a smile, and he said in a deep voice, It's been a long time since I last saw the third princess. I find her more and more interesting. As he spoke, my eyes fell on his slightly moving red lips. I suddenly felt a little flustered, and the tip of my nose was lingering with the fresh scent of tea that night. I trembled unconsciously. Clark. Philip Clark. What a coincidence. Unfortunately, I deliberately. Master Clark. Wynn ran over briskly. Are you waiting for me here? So that's why he came here specifically to wait for news from Wynn. Third princess, Congratulations. I interrupted him in time. You got what you wanted. 14. Outside the palace, he saw that the lives of the people were as scarce as those of ants, and they were starving. A 3-year-old child in a woman's arms was covered with sores due to infection. I suddenly found my original intention of studying medicine and my long-cherished wish to save lives and heal the wounded. An old lady took the medicine bowl I handed over and looked at me kindly. You are a very kind girl. You have saved so many people. You will definitely enter the paradise and become a bodhisattva after you die. The imperial physician beside him laughed and said, Do you know who this girl is? She is the third princess. I heard exclamations from all around, and some people whispered, She is the unruly and arrogant third princess who imprisoned her own young master. Now, the willful, eccentric, arrogant, and domineering third princess is actually said to be a bodhisattva. This is really the biggest absurdity in the world. The little girl who had just called me sister sweetly stepped back and staggered into her mother's arms. She cried and asked the woman, Is that the third princess who eats people as rumored? I smiled bitterly. Is my reputation among the people really that bad? The third princess who eats people? Late at night, feeling melancholy, I walked into the bamboo forest outside the side hall. I would pass by this place on those nights when Philip Clark was being treated for his injuries. In a trance, I seemed to see Philip Clark's figure from afar. How could he be here? He wanted to stay away from the third princess, so how could he set foot in this bamboo forest again? The bamboo forest was lush and dense, dark and leisurely. Suddenly, A palace maid jumped out from it with a dagger in her hand and stabbed at me. The knife cut my right shoulder, and blood immediately flowed out. I met her eyes, and my fierce face was revealed, full of anger and murderous intent. She roared and asked me, "Third princess, do you know? My child died in this flood. Why didn't you save him?" The skinny woman, I don't know why she is so strong. I can't break free. When she saw that the first knife did not hit my vital point, she immediately raised her hand and stabbed me a second time. But before the handle of the knife fell, she was stabbed in the throat by a sharp sword from behind. Blood spurted out of her mouth, and she was killed by the sword. I saw the person behind her and smiled. "Philip Clark, it's really you. Why are you here?" Philip Clark said nothing. With a cold face, he pulled me into his arms, stripped off my clothes, and looked at my injuries. I blushed and tried to block his hand. "Philip Clark, you are not a doctor, and you can't treat illnesses." He pushed away my hand that was blocking my way, frowned, and stopped the bleeding for me. With his eyebrows lowered, quiet and focused, his hair fell on my neck, which was a little itchy. I couldn't help but ask, "Philip Clark, why did you save me? The death of the third princess won't do you any harm." I didn't say the rest. Although I have no intention of competing for the position of empress, if I die, Wynn's biggest stumbling block will be gone. Philip Clark's lips curled slightly and he smiled. I did hate the third princess and wanted her to die. 15. In my bedroom, Philip Clark sat on the edge of the bed, leaned over, and cleaned my wound. I'm still mad about what he just said. Although I know better than anyone that the third princess he wants dead is not me. But I was just annoyed, mad at him for no reason and unreasonably. I pushed his hand away and asked coldly, "Don't you want to kill me?" Philip Clark raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled, "But now I don't want the third princess to die." I stared at him in amazement. He came closer, dipped his fingertips in hemostatic plaster, and gently pressed my shoulder. It was a little painful, and I frowned but said nothing. Philip Clark suddenly whispered, "I belong to myself, not the fourth princess." I didn't go there to wait for her on purpose that day. Is he explaining it to me? But why should he explain it to me? In the original plot, Philip Clark loved Wynn so madly that he seemed cruel to her, but in fact he was soft-hearted. He pushed Wynn away, but planned everything for her behind her back. From the moment he started planning her path to becoming an emperor, he had already built a grave for himself in the process of living and dying. I didn't want to get involved in their relationship. At first, I just felt sorry for Philip Clark's great but secretive love. Later, I inexplicably became a player in the game and was captured by him. It shouldn't be like this. I looked up and smiled. "Philip Clark, let's not meet again." His eyes suddenly became angry, and he looked at me sternly. The third princess got up early every morning, boiled herbs, and spent several hours doing acupuncture and moxibustion for me to heal my wounds. Later, she braved the wind and snow to come to the side hall to change the medicine for me. I should hate the third princess, but after going around in circles I ended up back in this bamboo forest. But the third princess said something like, "I don't want you to see me again." The third princess is getting better and better at teasing me. Philip Clark leaned over and suddenly kissed me, an angry kiss that was lingering and then slowly turned into a gentle silence. The whole hall was completely silent. I could only hear each other's heartbeats. At that moment, I lost my soul. Are you trying to seduce me again? Or, I dare not hope. But after Philip Clark kissed me, he locked my waist tightly in his arms, and his eyes were gentle, passionate, and loving. He smiled beside my ear and said, "I have always been a tit-for-tat person. The third princess imprisoned me, so I want to lock her up tightly with an iron chain. The third princess should not have let me go back then." I couldn't hear what he said afterwards. Groggily, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep in his arms. If it is a dream, then just treat it as a dream, and it is also a beautiful dream that I have been hoping for a long time. 16. The news that I had been assassinated and injured quickly spread throughout the palace. Some gossipers spread rumors that this was a fight for the throne. The eldest princess married far away in the frontier, and the second princess spent the whole day in meditation and chanting Buddha's name. Rumors spread in the palace, and the fourth princess sent assassins to kill the third princess. I was changing my dressings when Wynn broke into my bedroom. She saw my bloody right shoulder and stood there in a daze, her lips trembling. After a long while, she finally said, "It wasn't me. It really wasn't me who sent someone to assassinate you." I smiled, asked her to sit down on the carved Wangwali armchair, stood up and poured her a cup of rose-scented tea to calm her nerves, and said, "I know it's not you." The fourth princess, Wynn, has always been a person who dares to love, hate, and act. She hates intrigues and sneers at conspiracies and plots. In my memory, Wynn asked for the throne openly and honestly. When she expressed her love to Philip Clark, she was open and aboveboard, never afraid of gossip. Even when she broke up with Philip Clark later, it was clean. When she came out of my father's palace that day, I just gave her a little hint, and she took the dynasty's sure enemy and personally led the soldiers to Puzhou, where the disaster was the worst. It was also at this time that she met the young General Wei Shu. "How do you know it wasn't me? I wanted to compete with you for the throne." I laughed. How could someone who was so honest in front of his opponent do such a dirty thing? I teased her deliberately. "Philip Clark helped me find out that the maid went insane because of the loss of her child. It has nothing to do with you." "Well, it's good to find out." She widened her eyes again and said, "Master Clark, I will not give it to you either." Wynn lowered her head, her long eyelashes fluttering slightly, looking a little sad. "He said he only regarded me as a student and had no interest in me, but I really liked him. When I was outside the palace, I read his articles and have always admired him." She raised her eyebrows again and smiled innocently. "So, I won't give him to you. Let's compete fairly." The girl is bright and charming, lively and lovely, with an unconcealable radiance and liveliness in her eyes. So beautiful. 17. With the joint efforts of the government and the people, the disaster was finally over. Philip Clark came to see me several times, but I avoided him. The kiss that night made me panic. I was not yet familiar with this kind of sober indulgence. Before I had time to sort out my thoughts, my father urgently summoned Wynn and me to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. He had always been kind and friendly to Wynn and me, but at this moment, he had a serious face and sighed as he sat on the dragon throne. He looked at me, then at Wynn, his face full of gloom and worry. I heard him say in a calm voice, "Suani is interested in forming an alliance with our dynasty to build a friendly relationship for generations. We need a princess to marry their fourth prince." I glanced at Wynn. Her face was pale and she was biting her lip tightly, about to speak. My cold and clear voice came from the empty hall of Supreme Harmony. "Your son is willing." Wynn stared at me in disbelief. There was a hint of pain in my father's eyes when he looked at me. I knew it was difficult for him too. If possible, he would not send either Wynn or me away. But he is a king first and a father second. Our country has just experienced a disaster, and the refugees have not yet recovered from the grief of losing their loved ones. How can we withstand another war? The only candidates for the princess to marry were Wynn and me, but she was the empress who would create a prosperous era in the future, so I knew very well that I was the only candidate from the beginning to the end. Wynn took my hand outside the palace, called me sister, and began to cry miserably, saying that we must have other solutions and that she would return Philip Clark to me, as if the path I was going to take was a dead end. I looked at her with a smile. Wynn, I just don't want to be called the cannibalistic third princess by the people anymore. In fact, according to the original plot, the third princess had already died in a dirty, smelly mass grave and turned into a pile of bones. However, the story went differently. Philip Clark's leg was healed, he rejected Wynn, and the third princess did not die. This is the best ending for the third princess. My choice wrote the rest of my life and changed the fate of all of them. 18. I don't know when Philip Clark broke into my bedroom. When he breathed into my ear, I smelled alcohol, and soon I tasted the aroma of intoxicating peach blossoms. His lips, filled with the scent of alcohol, kissed me fiercely between my lips and teeth. I struggled, and my sharp nails scratched his cheek, leaving a bloody mark on that exquisite and perfect face. Philip Clark's eyes were silent and deep, and the corners of his mouth curled up with a hint of sarcasm. When did the third princess become so selfless? The third princess, who has always been selfish, actually asked to marry a foreign princess. He grabbed my throat, frowned, and smiled. The third princess wants to be a bodhisattva who saves people from suffering? My heart was pounding, but I kept a straight face and said in a low voice, "Philip Clark, you are drunk." He laughed softly, rolled off me, and lay beside me, his whole body softened into a puddle of mud, saying, "I am drunk, I am drunk." Philip Clark lay beside me, his eyes closed, mumbling to himself. My fingertips were dipped in ointment, and as soon as they touched his wound, they were held tightly and wrapped in a warm palm. He didn't say anything else, just held my fingers tightly and lay quietly. We all know clearly that the interests of family and country always come above all else. I raised my eyes and stared at Philip Clark quietly. The bloodstain was obvious, but the flaw did not outweigh the merits. His face was still handsome, but the cloud of sorrow between his brows could not be dispelled or wiped away. 19. To show its sincerity, Xuanyi sent the fourth prince Xianyuanyu to come to our dynasty in person to welcome the bride. The wedding procession was huge, and the people all said that the third princess was righteous and asked for the marriage to form an alliance in exchange for the well-being of the people. On the day Xianyuanyu entered the city, the people cheered. Only after experiencing disasters did they realize how precious and desirable a peaceful and stable life is. Xianyuanyu stood in the hall, looking dignified and majestic, and presented a gift from Xuanyi, a one-of-a-kind golden butterfly pearl crown. The gems on the crown were a deep blue, mysterious and profound. He said that he would present it to his future imperial concubine. With a sullen face, he performed the Xuanyi salute and was invited by my father to sit on the side of the high platform, facing west and east, with me. I lowered my eyes, unable to help but look for Philip Clark under the platform. He also looked up at me. It was dark and gloomy, and there was a bottomless, cold pool hidden there. The jug of wine on his table is almost empty. I think Philip Clark is going to be drunk again tonight. In fact, I also want to get drunk, forget the past, go back to the time before I became the third princess, and be a complete outsider. Xianyuanyu beside me was also pouring himself glass after glass of wine. I heard his faint sigh. This banquet was a wedding banquet, but no one had a happy look on their face. After the palace banquet, I bowed to Xianyuanyu and was about to leave when he suddenly called me. Xianyuanyu's face was slightly drunk, but his demeanor was still dignified. He asked me softly, "Third princess, do you know that there is a Nanpuchuo temple in the suburbs?" I frowned in confusion and looked at him in bewilderment. How could he, a native of a small town, suddenly mention the temple of my dynasty? He lowered his long eyelashes, curled his lips, and chuckled. "I just heard that the peach blossoms there are beautiful, very beautiful." Under the gorgeous palace lanterns, I could clearly see a beautiful mole at the corner of Xianyuanyu's eye, which was stained with alcohol and a slightly decadent and gorgeous red. The small mole at the corner of the eye is also known as the amorous mole. 20. I guess that Xuanyuanyu had a girl in his heart. But I never thought that he was so bold as to bring that little nun with untied hair to my bedroom to beg me. The girl was wearing a gray monk's robe and had a plain face, but she looked like an exquisite little clay doll with a delicate and lovable face. Although she looked timid, her bright eyes were brave and bright. The proud fourth prince knelt on the ground with a plop and said that he had been looking for her for a long time and had given up hope, but she appeared in front of him again. He said that when he was in Shuani, he wanted to marry her, but he misunderstood her as a spy of our dynasty. He hurt her, and she was also deeply heartbroken and left Shuani. He begged me to help him, saying that without her, he would be just a walking corpse and there would be no difference between being alive and dead. Xianyuanyu had cold eyes, but when he looked at his beloved girl, his eyes were both gentle and passionate, and the love in his eyes was so full that it was about to overflow. I helped him up, frowned, and smiled. Xianyuanyu, for the alliance between the two countries, you must marry the third princess. On the day of the third princess's wedding, all the ministers, nobles, and common people in the court came to see her off. The third princess sat in the phoenix carriage from Shuani, and the fourth prince of Shuani, Xianyuanyu, personally led the way. The guard of honor held lanterns, and the fourth princess, Wynn, accompanied the queen in the Nine Dragons sedan chair. She wore the unparalleled golden butterfly pearl crown on her head and a red veil on her face, looking elegant and noble. The third princess married far away in Shuani for the sake of eternal friendship between the two countries. 21. In a small fishing village in Puzhou, there was a female doctor who opened a clinic. It is said that her method of treating diseases is unique, and all kinds of difficult and complicated diseases can be cured by her. The villagers nearby praised her as a bodhisattva who could bring people back to health. I was pounding cardamom when Aunt May came to my yard with the braised carp. She put down the carp with a smile, rolled up her sleeves, and started to help me. As she rolled up her sleeves, she said in a hoarse voice, "Anabel, look at you. It's too hard for a woman to run a clinic. You need to find a man to help." I smiled but said nothing. Ever since I cured Aunt May's cold legs that had troubled her for years, she comes to bring me things every now and then and even insists on introducing a husband to me. Anabel, the man I'm introducing to you this time is different from the previous ones. He's so handsome, like an immortal from the ninth heaven. He's also a teacher, very gentle and refined. If Aunt May hadn't gotten married and had a baby, she would have definitely competed with you for it. While picking the fish bones from the braised carp, I replied perfunctorily, "A fairy from the nine heavens will surely be fought over by those little girls in the village. I won't join in the fun." "No, Anabel, this time it's really different, Mr. Clark," I didn't hear a word of what he said afterwards about the immortal who came from the nine heavens, the teacher with peerless beauty. The person I like is far away in the imperial city. He is a young man who cares about the world and has the talent to govern the country. He is as handsome as a bee and has unparalleled looks in the world. After eating the carp, I lazily lay down on the rattan chair in the courtyard to take a nap. The afternoon sun was warm and sprinkled on my body, warm and comfortable. I was in a deep sleep, and without knowing when, the sunny and breezy sky suddenly turned cloudy and rainy. When I woke up, there was an oil paper umbrella held above my head. I looked up and saw fine raindrops falling on the shoulders of the person holding the umbrella. He was dressed in black, his brows were peaceful and calm, and his eyes were breathtakingly beautiful. Philip Clark curled his lips, leaned down, picked me up from my panic, and whispered softly in my ear, third princess, I am here to imprison you." My lips trembled. "Prison me? Where is the prison?" He raised his eyebrows slightly and chuckled. "I am just a poor teacher now. I think the third princess's small clinic is very good." I sighed slightly. "Philip Clark, there is no third princess here anymore. She married far away in Shuani." He held me on his lap, his voice sad but gentle. "I don't care who the third princess is. I want to imprison the person in front of me, no matter if you are a princess from the imperial city or a female doctor from a small fishing village. From the beginning to the end, I just wanted to be with you alone." 22. In the dark night, he held me in his arms and told me the story of what happened after I left the imperial city. He said that his father was going to give up the throne to Wynn in advance, and he and the queen were going to live a leisurely life. Wynn and the young General Wei Shu were playing and fighting all day long, but she got jealous when she saw him approaching other girls. He thought I really married to Shuani and drank every day to drown his sorrows. Philip Clark kissed my forehead and asked me softly, "Why didn't you tell me that the person getting married that day wasn't you?" I smoothed the wrinkles between his brows and said with a smile, "How can a dragon swim in shallow water? What's more, you have lofty ambitions." He chuckled and flicked my forehead with his slender finger. "To achieve your ambitions, you don't have to be in the imperial city." I was in his arms, chatting about everything under the sun. As we chatted, his arms around me gradually tightened, and a passionate kiss followed the next moment. Philip Clark's kiss was tender and gentle. He was always very calm, but his hands were flustered as he untied my ties. He asked me softly, "Anabel, can you tear it apart?" His eyes, deep and dark, hid desire, hooked me into them. He held up my back with one hand, wrapped me in his body. I was about to melt. His hoarse low moans were in my ears. "The hair is tangled, the hibiscus tent is warm, the candlelight reflects the chaotic shadows. It is a charming night." There is a love story circulating in the small fishing village of Puzhou. On a misty morning, the poor female doctor went up the mountain to collect herbs. Halfway up the mountain, she met the handsome teacher with a lame leg. She brought him home for treatment, and they stayed together for more than half a month. More than half a month later, the teacher brought all his belongings and stayed in the female doctor's small courtyard, wanting to ask her for marriage.